you've got to hone in on what makes each person tick, because then you can pitch them on the idea of working with you based on that motivation.
You, in a way, had to become them in the sense of deception.
You're not deceiving just because it's fun to deceive people. It's just what you have to do. We were serving in a country that was one of the kidnapping and carjacking capitals of the world. They would kidnap, sell them to Al-Qaeda, and those people never came back.
You make a mistake, you get walked into a room by your best friend, you don't walk out again.
When you have revenge in your heart, you might as well dig two graves, one for you, one for them.
You're having to deceive people about who you are, what your real mission is, why you're really there. You're doing that for the greater good.
We are back. We are in the studio today. Danny, feels good, doesn't it?
I feel pumped right now.
Oh, and Danny feels pumped. Watch out. We got a special podcast episode today for you guys with a very special guest. We're very excited about this for a number of reasons. Firstly, she has a lot of experience in the part of the world that our parents come from, which is so unique and valuable. But I think most importantly, she used to run the show in the CIA for counterintelligence, counterterrorism. We want to hear all about this. So we want to welcome to the show, Michele Assad. Welcome to the show, Michele.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Well, we are delighted to have you. We're grateful to have you on the show. So why don't you just, jump in, tell us about your story, how you got started, what made you join the CIA in 2002, and let's hear all about it.
Sure. So I'm actually from a very small town in Central Florida. Didn't know anything about the world, but I went on a mission trip a few days after I graduated high school, and that was to Egypt to work in a Christian orphanage in Upper Egypt. And that month-long experience of service changed my life. And from there, I just was so fascinated by the Middle East and how different it was than anything that I was familiar with. And so I kept taking these steps to learn more and travel and grow. And so eventually that took me into Georgetown University, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, and I got recruited by the CIA while getting my master's degree there. And that happened right before 9/11. And so it was during a period of time in which that wasn't necessarily a popular expertise to have. Like, what are you going to do with an Arab studies degree?
Right.
And then, so my husband, Joseph, who is from Egypt, he got into the CIA a few months before me, had started training, and I was about to start my training when 9/11 happened. And wow. So you have a native speaker of Arabic, and then a girl from a small town in Florida who studied the Middle East and pre-positioned to be a part of this global war on terror that none of us knew was coming. And so it thrust us into a very interesting period of time. So we spent 10 years in 5 overseas tours in the Near East region, and doing primarily counterterrorism and counterintelligence work.
Amazing. And when you say you got recruited, how did that conversation go? Was it just a couple people sent and they knew about, obviously they knew about you ahead of time, and do you get pulled into a private room, or what does that conversation look like?
It wasn't that sexy. So, what happened was I applied to every single job in the Career Center at Georgetown because I was so desperate for a job. And literally the only one that I heard back from was the CIA, which blew my mind. I really couldn't get any other job. And then I get a phone call from a recruiter who said, "We have your resume here at the CIA and we're very interested." And I was like, really?
Yeah.
Me? And that started a very long process of getting vetted by the CIA, of course, all the background investigations, all of the really long interviews. We're talking 2-3 hour long interviews, and polygraphs and all kinds of stuff. It takes quite a while to get through each part of that process. And then I couldn't believe it. At the end of that, they're like, "And you're going to start training in January of 2002. And I was like, I cannot believe I made it in. I wasn't quite sure how that happened, but I did.
So you applied to be an analyst, I think, first, right? Like you weren't planning to be an operative, right?
So actually, I didn't apply for anything. They just told me that's what they thought I should be. So I went through this whole process to be an analyst. And it sounded pretty cool. I was like, wow, I didn't know what all the jobs were in the CIA. And actually, right after I graduated Georgetown and I was about to start that job, I got a rejection from the CIA in the mail. And I was like, what just happened? And they're like, we no longer want you for this position. You no longer have what we need. Or I know it was a very strange language, rejection. And I was absolutely thrown by this. And eventually, my husband and I learned that there was this whole other side of the CIA called operations. So the analysts stay at headquarters and the operators go overseas, and they're the ones that collect the intel. We didn't know that. And so my husband, Joseph, was like, that sounds awesome. I want to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, I just got rejected by the CIA. So you knock yourself out, see how far you can get in the process. And so a lot of times we think that, rejection is it's the worst feeling in the world. It's awful and it's shocking. But it was interesting because God used that rejection because I wasn't supposed to be an analyst. He had bigger plans for my life, and that was to be on the other side of the CIA that I didn't know existed. So I always tell people things feel really bad in the moment, but there's usually a reason. If you just hang in there long enough, you'll figure out what it is.
I literally was with a friend a few days ago. Something happened to him that he's not happy about. It was similar to a rejection. I said, look, you don't know why you got rejected. And he's a person of faith as well. And I said, you don't know why that happened. So it might feel like it's the worst thing going on in your life right now, but it could be just a blessing down the road. So just move on from it. Don't linger in your feelings too long. Sometimes rejection and failure are the keys to success. So
yes, big believer.
Yeah, I believe that. And so like we always share with our audience, like our parents came from Iraq. They met here in Canada. They got married at their church. And so they left Iraq for the same reason, but they had different journeys because they never knew each other back home. And that's a lot. It's very common amongst our people who left the country under the regime of Saddam Hussein and stuff like that. So, I mean, you lived in Iraq for most of your career, or?
No, so our time in Baghdad, we were specifically right in Baghdad, was for a year, and it was during 2006 and 2007 when, Iraq was a total disaster, as you may recall. So it was a really, really hard time to be there. All of the fighting between Sunnis and Shia, and then infighting between Sunnis and Shia, and then of course the Christians always get caught in the middle and always are always in a bad spot. So that was a very interesting time to learn about Iraqi culture, dealing directly with Iraqi people after, being at Georgetown and reading books. But, there's only so much you can learn from a book, know. So it was a very enlightening experience for me to actually deal with Iraqis. And I admire your parents. My husband came to the States because of persecution as a Christian. He was kicked out of university, which again was a rejection that was a very difficult pill to swallow because the Middle East is like the West. Education is everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this about Iraq, but as horrible as Saddam was, he instituted a very good education system in Iraq. So very, very smart people. Iraqis are. So, but in any case, Christians have to fight so hard constantly when they're the minorities in places like the Middle East. And so I'm always so delighted to meet people like yourselves who are the product of your parents suffering, but having the courage to push through and starting a new life in a new country, which is so hard. Yeah. Like, when I see you sitting there right now, it makes me so happy. It makes me happy for you. It makes me happy for your parents and for your community.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. And yeah, it's like, we always tell people it's our journey is nothing. Our struggles are nothing growing up in Canada and building a business. Like that's fun. Like compared to, as you said, starting a new life in a new country, leaving your country and like immigrating to another country. We thought about, potentially doing that because of what, the last few years have revealed to us. And it's like, but where are you going to go? You live in the best part of the world. And it's so right. Like that's the real struggle. They're the real pioneers. And so your husband is Arab Christian or Assyrian or Chaldean or?
So he's actually he's Egyptian, so comes from the family from an Orthodox tradition, but actually his dad was an evangelical pastor, so he was a minority of the minority in Egypt.
For sure. Because they're Coptic, right? Like in Egypt, they're Coptic Christian, right?
That's correct. Coptic Orthodox, yes.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you a quick question. So going back to when you started working at the CIA with your husband, with Joseph, how was that, on your marriage? Because obviously, you were going through a process of, training and things like that. Was it fun? Like, were you side by side with him when you were in the training? Because I know out on the field, you guys were together. Right.
Right.
How was
So
that?
we were in two different training classes, which was probably a good thing, because then you really experienced it without any tdistractions. So Joseph went through first, and then I went through second. And the training lasts for a year, that tradecraft training, and they're trying to be sure that you have what it takes to take on this crazy job of living undercover and carrying out clandestine operations overseas, which is no small thing. But then once we started our careers in the field, we were together. I mean, we were side by side, which thank God for that, because we served at some really, really tough places, which as a female, I don't think I could have done that on my own. I mean, could I? Yeah, but it would have been really hard. So having your spouse next to you, because you don't have anything else. Like, you've left your family, your home. We sold our house, we sold our car, we left our family, and now you're like on the edge of the earth. Like, you got to have something. So thankfully we had each other.
And your family back home didn't know what you guys were doing, obviously, when you guys were out in the mission field.
Some didn't. So,
okay, interesting.
Yeah. So the CIA says, like, you can tell your family and like your really close friends, but only if they can keep your secret. So if your mom is going to be so proud that she's going to tell everybody, like, can't tell mom, or so you have to make sure they understand the gravity of never saying what you really do or who you really are, like over the phone or over emails, or they've got to also carry the burden of keeping your cover. So my family, several in my family knew that we worked for the CIA, and they knew where we were working, but of course they didn't know on a daily basis what we were doing.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell my parents. My mom, first thing, she'd call all her friends, "You made it to the CIA."
Oh my gosh.
It's like a giant achievement. I would not be able to tell her.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to kind of just a follow up on that. I think you mentioned, a lot of what you're doing now and, talking or sharing your story had a lot to do with your faith, right? So I've heard that you're a Christian, right? And we're also Christian as well, too. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Like, what about Christianity kind of made you want to go out and share your story?
So that 10 years in the agency wasn't a typical career, even within the CIA, because we were Arabists and, my husband was a native speaker of Arabic. We were sent to like really tough places. And I would be lying if I said that I had like the best attitude the whole time. There was a lot of whining and complaining about, oh my gosh, we just served 2 years in one of the hardest places in the planet, and now you're sending us to Iraq, in the middle of the worst part of the war. And it felt like every time we turned around, we were getting sent to another yet difficult, dangerous place. And I kept asking God, why? Like, why? Why does there have to be so much difficulty? And why does this have to be so hard? So my faith was really integral to me hanging on and not giving up. Like understanding or believing that there is a greater purpose, even if you don't know in the moment what it is. And so that gave me the courage not to give up, not to fold. And so that was really important, because at the end of that 10 years, we look back on our career and we're like, oh my goodness, all our friends who served in really beautiful locations and had a really interesting, they easy in comparison. they didn't have the kind of expertise we had. I mean, you want a schooling in terrorism? Go meet with some terrorists, like, and meet with
for real.
a number of them, right? Face to face, often. Like, the best schooling in counterintelligence is to deal with a bunch of liars and double agents and difficult people. And so we realized that the fruit of that struggle was this expertise that was just like off the chart. And so while it was painful and while it hurt, God had a bigger plan, which I think you're both aware of, which happened post-CIA experience, which was helping people from your parents' country and helping other persecuted Christians. So in other words, if you can hang through the suffering, God has a greater purpose. And that purpose always deals with helping other human beings. And so everything that I'm doing with my life now is because I feel called to inspire other people to do hard things, to not give up when the going is tough, to be willing to do what other people aren't, because that is where you have the real purpose in life and real impact.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's so funny because as you're speaking right now, I was just listening to it, the words you're speaking. And yesterday I was reading in the Old Testament the story of Joseph. And it so happens to be the name of your husband, and how when he was in jail, I'm not even making this up, like how he was in jail for so long, and he was in that struggle, that tough time where he didn't see how, his brothers selling him into slavery was gonna, be worked out for his good later on. And so it's amazing how God always does have a plan for us. And, even though we might not see it in the moment, he is working in the background and is setting us up for something much better to help others and equip them, right? So that's so awesome.
Equip. I like that. What a great story. You're like, how can something good come out of slavery? Like, how?
Yeah.
You can't in your natural mind understand that, but yet, but God, right?
Yeah, he became, for those of you who don't know the story of Joseph, he became basically the number 2 in Egypt. So that's just basically like equivalent to the Pharaoh. You're just under the Pharaoh. And so he ran Egypt. And the story is, with the drought that happened and there was this prophecy given, they were able to, in their wisdom, God's wisdom, they were able to now, store all this food for the drought. And then they were able to feed who knows how many people from all parts of the world, including his family who sold him into slavery. So there's some irony there, and it comes back full circle. So that's a great story. I would be remiss, and I think our audience would be like very interested if we didn't ask you about some of those meetings you had with those terrorists. Like, tell us exactly, like, what was your day-to-day like? Like, walk us through one of your days and then tell us something crazy that you went through.
Sure. So on a day-to-day basis, my job was called a collection management officer. So it was one step behind my husband, who was a case officer. So during that time period, this agency was very sexist. So they thought that men should be in this collector position and women were not capable of doing that job. So Joseph's job was to develop sources of information, recruit them, in what we call handle them, which means covertly meet with them and get that intelligence. So my job was to manage that collection, like who could be a good source of information, who might have the motivations to be willing to work with us. And then once the information is collected, to say, is this any good? Is this a lie? Is this truth? And so we have to try to do our best to vet those details and then distribute it to the intelligence community. Now, a lot of that job was not like super fun. I would probably read, oh my gosh, hundreds of intelligence reports a day. If I wasn't writing them or editing them or disseminating them, I was reading them. So I was reading everything I could possibly get my hands on about terrorism in Iraq, through human signals intelligence, SIGINT, and all of the above. Not fun, not easy. But what's interesting about doing things other people don't want to do is, in the process, you become an expert on that area. So very slowly and gradually, I built up my knowledge on who were the bad guys in Iraq and, what were they up to and what were the holes in information. So when God eventually opened the door for me to actually do what I'd been told I couldn't do for years in the agency, which is meet with and handle a terrorist source. It was so fascinating, that process, because I was investigating the death of an American woman who was doing nonprofit work in Iraq regarding the electoral system. She was 27 years and she was brutally murdered in Yarmouk, Baghdad. And so my job was to meet with our sources and to find out if they had any knowledge of who had either ordered or executed this horrible attack. And so I got to start with Joseph's source, who was a really interesting guy. He was like a mid-level insurgent. He was like, kind of like a bodybuilder looking guy. He definitely lifted weights. And he was like, he wasn't an ideologue. He wasn't a leader. He was like a break their legs if they don't do what you want kind of guy.
The enforcer.
The enforcer.
Yes, he was that guy. And
Bone
he had it
breaker.
written all over him.
They called him Bone Breaker.
Seriously, I'm sure. I can only imagine the names this guy had. So, I'm walking in, thinking about what I have to achieve with this guy who's going to think I'm a moron because I'm a woman, because of his misogynistic attitude and his terror ideology. So how do I find a way to make this guy respect me and work with me when in all reality, all he wants to do is flirt with me because I'm a younger female? You guys know the culture.
Yeah,
for sure.
I say that because it's very important for people to understand exactly the dynamics you have to deal with. And so it's ugly, it's disgusting. It's what you're dealing with. So I'm like, okay. So I'm so nervous. I'm like shaking. My heart is racing. And I'm like, okay, Michele, get it together. If he sees you shaking, that's it. You're going to lose all respect. So I walk in the room and I'm so cognizant of my body language because Iraqis developed a sixth sense, street smarts for what other people are thinking. Why? Because they had to exist under Saddam Hussein, who ruled with an iron fist. And he set up all these intelligence agencies that not only reported on the populace, but reported on each other. So you could never tell anybody what you really thought, or you could get yourself killed, literally. So what that, 20 years or however long Saddam was in power, he was this whole society was developing where you had to always watch yourself, and you survived and you thrived by watching body language and being able to lie well, quite honestly. And so I know this guy is watching my body language. So, I'm trying to put my shoulders back and stand tall, and I walk through the door, and he sees me and he jumps out of his chair because female, so exciting. And I'm like, yeah, here we go. Here it goes. And I walk across the room and I shake his hand and start speaking Arabic to him. And he's shocked that I'm speaking any Arabic. And he's like, what? Who are you? What are you? How do you know Arabic? So I used that shock and awe to get him off balance. And then I started telling him that I've been following his case. I'm so impressed with the work that he's done, in concert with his case officer, how I'm sure that they saved dozens of lives the last couple of weeks based on his intelligence. And so I was building him up. I was building him up, not that he needed it. His ego is plenty big. Guys, they were really something. However, subconsciously, I'm also, by me telling him what I think of him, raising my stature. Okay. So it's like the psychology of interpersonal relations and espionage. It's this mind game that you're constantly playing. So I'm telling him what I think of him. So I'm trying to lift myself up. And then finally, after, he's feeling good. I understand him. I appreciate him. I know what he's done. And I'm smart enough to read the file and know what he's achieved. Then finally, I have to show him I'm intelligent. So I start talking to him about Iraqi culture. And he was, again, shocked because most Americans didn't know anything about Iraq or the Middle East or anything. And so finally, once once that clicked, like she knows what she's talking about, she followed my case and she's smart. It was like everything clicked. And that terrorist now thinks I'm like the coolest thing ever. And now I've taken my, my place of, him underestimating me, and I flipped it. So now he wants to work with me because I'm a unicorn. I'm different. I'm a woman. Yeah. And so now I've changed the terms of that engagement. And I walked away from the meeting that day realizing that, oh my gosh, not only can I do this, but I can do this really, really well. And this might be my greatest asset here, being an underestimated female.
Yeah.
Who knew?
That's awesome.
I was just thinking that. I was like, that whole underestimation of you, like who you are on their part, it would have been such a great asset if you knew how to use it. Obviously you did. And so you built this guy up who was already built up, but in his mind, you're kind of like a fan of his almost. You made him feel good. You filled that void in his heart that he was always searching for when he was doing steroids. and then so you're meeting with these people, but now just to backtrack a little bit, they know you're CIA. Obviously, they know you're CIA. And so how does that initial confrontation take place? Like, they're terrorists, that you have their track record, but they're probably I don't know how to say this, but low level terrorists, and you know this already. So I guess the CIA weighs the pros and cons of either taking them out or bringing them in versus keeping them on the street to catch the bigger fish. If that makes sense.
Yes. Good job. Okay. That's exactly.
Damn, you trying to get a new job, Matt?
Yes.
Trying to get a good reference over here.
Yes,
now I know
Michelle.
the point of this meeting.
Let me know.
Well, that's exactly right. So of course I can't go into a lot of detail about like how we get to them, like how we approach them. There's different methodologies that we use to do that. So, and it can be a very challenging question. How do we get to that person that we think we need? But then the second question is, how do you figure out what motivates them? Because unless you figure that out, you can't make, would you like to work for the CIA? I know you hate us. I know we're your biggest enemy. And we know that you'll get killed if anybody knows you're doing this, but come work for us. Like,
Right.
You've got to hone in on what makes each person tick, because then you can pitch them on the idea of working with you based on that motivation. And that
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, because like, why would those people do that? Why would they put themselves at risk, right? It must have been for a greater reason, right? That would benefit them, like would it be like maybe like that guy wanted to move up in their organization and he'd want to maybe give information on another terrorist? Is that kind of like the gist pretty much? Like,
you guys are naturals.
Yeah.
Like they're just trying to like mess up and screw another guy. They're like, let me just give them some info. And that's crazy.
It's interesting. So, there were some sources, not many of them, who were in it for the reasons like they were terrorists and still are, serving as a terrorist, but they don't believe in the ideology any longer. And they're willing to risk their life to work against the rest of their group. Like, those are the people that you just like, oh my gosh, this person's amazing. And, you pray for their safety like all the time. But then you've got those guys, which you've just alluded to. Why would they work for the CIA? One of the biggest reasons was to off the competition.
Yeah, see, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm great. I'm working with the CIA. That guy over there, he's the really bad guy. So what they want to do is they want to be the big terrorist on the block, and let's get rid of the competition. You got to know that as a CIA officer. You better know that. Sometimes they just needed money.
But is there like a contingency plan? Like, okay, you know what? We obviously don't support this terrorist, but we're gonna use him to get what we want. And then, if his ambition is to now lead the pack, like, we'll take him out before he gets to that point. Like, obviously there has to be some sort of, we don't want to build a terrorist up either if we're with this, the CIA, right?
Right.
There's that balancing act, I guess.
A very delicate balancing act. And I won't pretend that we always got it right, because we got it wrong a lot, and we created shakes that were never shakes, because they got so much power after working with us. That's very unfortunate. We changed a lot of the power structures in that country, which is why it was, so unstable and falling apart. So yeah, you're always kind of like trying to balance, like, and you want to be on top of it. Like, they're giving us information, but are they also working against us at the same time? So you always have to have your antennas up to identify when someone goes rogue or was always rogue. Are they feeding you made up information? Are they feeding you false information? Are they collecting on you so they can attack you? Interesting. Yeah. And of course that did happen. I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier, because the kinds of people we were dealing with were so dangerous and we didn't recognize most of the time. Like, honestly, I would look at my comments like, do you guys understand how bad these people are and how quickly they can turn on you? And that's what happened in Afghanistan in 2009. One of our sources did exactly that and ended up killing 9 people in KAUST. So it was a very real possibility that I don't think all my colleagues fully appreciated, not understanding culture, I think.
Wow, that's intense for sure.
Very intense. And I was going to ask you about your 2 things I wanted to ask. One, did you ever encounter a female terrorist? Because usually they use the females and the children as a bomb, usually, as sad as it is to say. It does happen where they blow themselves up, the women and the children. But did you ever encounter someone that was in the organization that was a female?
There certainly were, but I never interacted with any of them.
Wow.
Yeah, that would have been a very interesting dynamic, but I never got that opportunity.
Yeah.
Those women could be super hardcore, sometimes more hardcore than even the men. Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
The women is the neck. that's how it works. So regardless of what they want to say, it's that's what it is.
Watch who you marry, right?
100%.
Absolutely.
I was just gonna follow up on that. Have you ever been in a situation, either with just yourself or with Joseph, your husband, where you guys were kind of like your cover was blown in a sense, like not fully completely blown, but like someone was on to you guys, like a CI, like an informant that you guys had? Like, did that ever happen to you guys where you kind of were scared to the point of like, damn, like our cover's blown, we got to go back to base and report or anything like that? Or
well, that's so weird. I've been asked that a number of times, and the interesting thing is, okay, so there were definitely situations where we were dealing with people who were asking too many questions, and I'm like, oh, okay, they've figured it out, or they know. Luckily, it wasn't anything that like where we really felt like we were in immediate danger. But I think the truth of the matter is what people don't understand. The places that we served, if you look like me, you're automatically assumed to be CIA.
For sure.
So instead of like it being a big secret, it was almost like the secret you have to live with. We're called undercover, but at the end of the day, we're like CIA, 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 because especially me, not my husband, he can blend, right? But me, I don't blend unless I can being next to Joseph was helpful though, because they would think, when we would speak Arabic to each other, they would say, oh, maybe she's Lebanese. So I'm like, yeah, let's just go with that. Lebanese, yes.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely think that for sure. 100%.
Yeah, it's like you stand out automatically. So it's how do you how it's not really about blending in. It's more about just not giving away your cover or certain details. It's kind of like learning how to live with it. You in a way had to become like them in the sense of the deception. Let's just call it that, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting because you're having to deceive people about who you are, what your real mission is, why you're really there, what you're really doing. But you're doing that for the greater good, you're not deceiving just because it's fun to deceive people. It's just what you have to do.
Yeah. On that point, I just wanted to dig a little deeper. Did you ever have like a moral dilemma, like being a Christian and then also at the same time doing the work you did where, you did have to lie, right, constantly? Or did you kind of feel like, what I'm doing is for the greater good, so it's okay for me to, to lie outright to somebody? Like, what are your thoughts on that as a Christian from that perspective?
Right. So I think it never like I never felt like I was compromising my Christianity, and that's because the way that we approach operations is we never blackmail anyone to work with us. We never force them into a corner. We never twist their arms or extort anyone. Like it shows in the movies, that's actually against the law. We're not allowed to, thank God, or I wouldn't do that and couldn't do that. So for me, it was always like, I'm asking someone to risk their life, but I'm also being very clear, like, that this is what you're doing. You're risking your life, but you have to find a way for them to see it in their best interest and for it to be in their best interest to do that. So, my faith was never challenged in that way. I would say my faith was more challenged internally because I did work with a few people in the CIA who lied and fabricated reports and had to speak up about that. And that was very uncomfortable because you think to yourself, it'd just be easier not to say anything. But when that person's information is reaching the desk of the president, then I have, that's very dangerous. And so there were times when Joseph and I had to say, do we say something? Oh gosh, that guy's your boss. You get into trouble. And that did in fact happen. So that was a very challenging period of time to deal with that issue.
So just kind of like on that note, do you feel the reason that George Bush said we're going to go into Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, 9/11 just happened? Do you feel that it was justified? Because they didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, from at least what we know, the public, they never found any weapons of mass destruction.
It was not justified. It was not. The intelligence was terrible. Anybody worth their weight in salt in terms of intellect and intelligence experience could look at that intelligence and see that it was, half-baked. It was unfortunate because, we all weren't in the CIA when a lot of that was happening, right? When all of those recommendations were being made. And there were people in that Bush administration who thought it was a good idea to remove Saddam because of the dictator that he was. And we all know he was horrible. Human rights. Oh my gosh. What he did to the Kurds and gassing the Kurds and the kinds of things that he did to keep those people in line. He was a terrible, horrible person. Yeah. But then look at the mess that we made, of Iraq by going.
And it feels like that whole region, like starting with Iraq, like became it was destabilized. And there's always the conspiracy theory about the whole idea of going after the oil, right?
Yeah, I love that conspiracy theory because it's my favorite. It has no bearing in actual reality, unfortunately. You think to yourself, maybe we could get something out of this with all the money that was spent. And at the end of the day, we didn't. So that's deeply unfortunate. So that conspiracy theory is debunked.
That's funny. Yeah. I wanted to ask, and I've always wanted to ask, like somebody that's worked for the CIA. So now that you're retired from the CIA, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, like if you go to Starbucks, are you constantly like reading people, or is it like you gotta like turn it off?
I know, like I'm being conscious about like my posture.
And like right now I'm like, she might be reading you.
Yeah.
Like is that something that's just natural to you, like breathing right now? Like you do it on a subconscious level, or is it like you walk into Starbucks and you're like, I'm not down to read anybody right now. I just want a coffee. Like how does that work on a day to day?
There's various levels of awareness, and you can't be in that elevated awareness for long periods of time. It's just not humanly possible. And anybody who says they are, they're trying to make themselves sound a little bit more interesting. Yeah. However, that being said, I was really, I think, born with this like natural inclination or natural ability or discernment to read body language or kind of understand how other people are feeling. Oh, that makes me crazy because I can never turn that off. And so in a sense, I do walk into Starbucks and I'm like happy, sad, mad. Like I know how everyone's feeling. Like, and I'm like, could you just drink your coffee?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. I feel like I get overwhelmed. Like I get tired just by, doing that.
That's why I don't like crowds. That's
Okay.
exactly the reason. There's just too much input, right?
Yeah. I feel like a little bit of situational awareness is healthy.
Yeah.
Like I go take my dog for walks, me and my wife, and I'm always telling her, just like watch out, like there's like where we walk sometimes there's some homeless people and like they don't look the nicest, so I'm just like, come on this side, walk beside me here.
Yes.
Like walk quickly when we walk right by them, you know what I mean? And just kind of keep an eye out. So I feel like that's always healthy to an extent, but yeah, I feel like it can sometimes get a little too much, definitely.
Yeah. No, but I like the people say, well, how do you do that? So I like your example because what you're saying is there are certain moments in which you need to have your antenna up. So when you're passing by a homeless encampment, and it's not against homeless people, but the very reality of it is a lot of them are on drugs, and people who are on drugs do things that are very dangerous, like stab people and whatever, attack people. So knowing that, you have to say, like, don't put your antenna up, cross the road, go this direction. If someone's approaching you and they look off, leave the area. So you have to know when to switch it on. You have to know when you're more vulnerable. So if you have your little kid, your new baby, your child, that's precious cargo. So you've got to be aware of your surroundings and know when you are more vulnerable.
I wanted to ask, since we have you, can you tell us, like, walk us through an example when you would know somebody is lying?
Yeah, like what's a good tell that you use?
Okay. Behavior. Okay. So whether you know it or not, your brain has cataloged all kinds of behavior in your entire life experience. And so when you have this, what we call this sixth sense moment where somebody presents to you is like, it gives you like a shudder up your spine or your hair stands up. What is happening is something about that person's behavior is cataloging in your brain as not being right. And you don't even necessarily know what you're keying into because your brain is so fast, like a supercomputer. So you're almost arriving at a destination or an assessment before you know how you got there. So I tell people, don't ignore it. So I'll give you an example. I was in the middle of surveillance training in the CIA, but it was on the weekend. So I was with family and we were in a toy store, very prominent toy store. And my 6-year-old niece was with me and we were walking down the Barbie aisle. And y'all know what the Barbie aisle looks like. It's like hot pink everywhere, right?
Yep.
So there's all this hot pink. And there's this dude crouched down by the Barbie dolls. And immediately I was like, what is he doing here? So I'm like looking for a kid. Does he have a child? Who's he here with? And then why did he look weird? Because he was very unkempt. He had like greasy hair that was going everywhere. His shirt was like half tucked in. I don't know. Something about his entire appearance and his behavior just felt off to me. So as we were passing that guy by, I said, I'm just going to keep my eyes on him and I'm going to watch him and see what he does. So as we got close to him and as we were about to pass by him in the aisle, he turned and looked at my 6-year-old niece with a look on his face that I will not even go into details. It was bad. And I knew that right away. That guy's a pedophile.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So just by his eyes. So if you just pay attention, you look, it's hard to miss. Like nobody would have missed the look in his face and his eyes. So of course you're like trying to like walk in front of her and shield her and get down the aisle and move out. But the idea is that when somebody strikes you as odd, pay very close attention. The things you will notice will surprise you.
So you're pretty much saying we all kind of have a spidey sense in us.
Yes.
Right? Okay, cool.
It's a two-edged thing. It's like we have a spidey sense, but there's also tells in terms of, when you're lying or I guess in that case, he wasn't lying, but he had an ulterior motive that you were able to spot and identify right away. It reminds me of the time I almost got kidnapped when I was a kid. And I saw those.
Wait, when did this happen? Wait a second.
You didn't know?
I'm his brother. I've never heard this in my life. This is not a joke. What are you talking about?
Listen, I had a breakthrough recently, okay?
What?
Yeah, no, it was outside of the Assyrian school on Saturdays where the no frills in Rexdale.
Oh, I've heard this story.
You know
I've heard the story.
And I saw the two guys from the corner of my eye when I was waiting for my dad to pick me up, and just something about them struck me the wrong way. And as soon as I looked at them, they both looked at me, and I immediately, as a child, like I was must have been in grade, 3, 4? Not even.
You were young.
I just went into the No Frills, which is like a grocery store we have here. And I went inside of there, and there was a police officer, because it was in a bad area. And so there was always a police officer where the cashiers were. And he was waiting there, just watching, making sure nothing bad happens in general. And I just went and stood like close by to him. And those two guys walked into the store and were looking around. And then thankfully my dad pulled up not too long after. And I just went in the car. And that moment affected me a lot in my life later on, because my defense mechanism started becoming more like all the time. I was just very defensive. But I remember as a kid, like looking back now, I would have never known like that. I would have never known that in general, but it was just natural for me to feel that something bad could have happened. Those guys were bad guys.
That's crazy.
So interesting and impressive that you had that. It really does suggest children do have that. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. And you don't want to like acculturate them out of it.
Definitely.
You want to develop that, if anything.
Yeah. The confidence. Definitely. If you don't feel right, then there's a reason, and you should not feel bad about finding the police officer or finding a person you can trust. Like, that's important as a parent.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll never forget that day. But yeah, I almost got kidnapped, guys.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. Insane. Yeah. But that stuff happens every day. So like,
yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's the reality we live in.
Definitely. Yeah. You definitely don't want to be a victim of something, and just do your best to always keep an eye around and look out for the behavior. So thanks for that tip. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Michelle, real quick. So after the CIA, what did you do in terms of like career? Did you go into like speaking right away, or did you, I think in the interview I was mentioning that I watched you, you talked a little bit about how you went back, I think, to Iraq, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Why'd you guys go back?
So, it's so funny. I always say, never say never. I will never go back to Iraq. Ding.
You're there. Bam. That's crazy.
We were, after 10 years of exhaustion and like missing out on life with family and missing out on normal, we ended up leaving the agency. It was a really tough 10 years. And that was a scary thing to do. And a lot of people warned us that you'll never feel this level of purpose again. And you'll never have the kind of impact that you could have in the CIA. Like nothing beats this. Nothing will ever come close to this. But yet we felt on a spiritual level that we were being led out. Okay. And that suggested to me that there is some big purpose that can be had on the outside of the CIA. Didn't know what it was. So initially, Joseph and I started a consulting firm that helps American businesses or other Western businesses working in the Middle East, because it's a very unique business environment, especially in the Gulf countries. And so anyway, we did that work, and we still do that work. So we did that based out of the Emirates for 4 years. And then we finally returned back to the United States in 2015. And I had this nagging feeling that Joseph should call his old boss, meaning from like, 15, 16 years prior to that. And so he finally made contact with her after this just constant nagging feeling. Like, I think it was a spiritual thing. And turns out she's like, gosh, Joseph, I'm so glad you called me. I've been trying to find you and contact you because I've just been brought into this fascinating project by Hollywood producers Mark Burnett and his wife Roma Downey. And they have a real heart for the persecuted church in the Middle East and have done a lot to support them financially. But this was the summer of like ISIS taking over Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, and sweeping across all the northern part of Iraq into the ancient Yazidi and Christian villages, and basically surrounding these villages and saying, convert or die.
Yeah.
We remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And then hundreds of thousands of people, running for their lives essentially into Erbil or Kurdistan, which, if people don't know, that's a kind of a more independent part of Iraq run by the Kurds. And so she said, Mark and Roma want to help some of these people that want to leave Iraq. So we've been trying to figure out someone we've got people who can raise money for the project. She was an expert on advocacy, particularly Capitol Hill. But we need someone who knows how to carry out complex operations in difficult places. Ding, ding, ding.
I know somebody.
Yeah. So we got brought into this project, which was fascinating because it wasn't an organization. It literally was just a grouping of people who cared and wanted to do good. And so it was like, what can we do? I don't know. Mark was like, we can help one family. We'll help one family. We'll start small and we'll see what we can accomplish. And so that kicked off in, say, it was like August, September of 2015, this effort to identify people who persecuted Christians who just couldn't stay in Iraq any longer, just needed to get out. Find people to work with, vet them, and then find a country willing to take these people. So Joseph found a priest based in Erbil in Kurdistan, Father Douglas, who was speaking in the United States, met with him and was like, that is the person we need to work with. Yeah. And so his church had been the receiver of thousands of Assyrian Christians from the Nineveh Plains, and he had been hosting them on his church grounds for years at that point. Wow. And he's like, yeah, a lot of them are just, they can't take it anymore. A lot of them are repeat refugees. They were Christians who were in Baghdad first, and then were chased out of Baghdad to Mosul. And then when Mosul was taken over, they were chased out of Mosul to the northern Nineveh Plains. Like, my goodness, how many times can you be uprooted, caught in the middle, killed, persecuted for your faith? So we worked really, really hard. And that was the time in which every country had too many refugees. So going to these countries and saying, would you like some more refugees? They're like, no, not really. We really don't. And so all the efforts to approach diplomatically countries at the Minister of Interior or presidential or prime minister level, no. We had a couple of maybes. They never came through. But eventually one country said yes, and that was Slovakia. Huh. And wow. Quite miraculously, I mean, this was such a complex operation, and we didn't know it was going to take years, but it ended up taking less than 3 months, because on December 10th, 2015, after only a few months of really intense work, we were able to airlift 149 Assyrian Christians out of northern Iraq and fly them to their new home in Slovakia.
That's amazing. Wow. I can't even believe what those people went through, like you were saying, leaving Baghdad, going to Mosul. And then, we've only seen videos here in the West of literal beheadings with ISIS, right? Which is just crazy. Can't even, when I saw that for the first time, I was like, it was just new, because we've never seen that here in the West, right? We've never experienced anything like that kind of persecution. And we're like, wow, this is real life happening in the Middle East right now, to our people, which is insane. So to hear that you're able to help 149 families, 149 people, that's amazing.
It felt good to do something tangible. It felt good to use your experience and to use your knowledge and expertise to help people in such a tangible way. And we and it's a hard thing. Your parents know, these people are setting up new lives in Slovakia, a place they may not have even heard of in their life, and you have to set up shop. You have to learn Slovakian. Probably never even heard the language before.
Yeah,
definitely happens.
It's a really hard thing to do, but what we were just so grateful to God was that they had an opportunity. They were given a new chance, and these people were saying, "We're doing it for our children. Like, this is hard, it's tough, and we might never actually live an easy life, but our kids will live a better life."
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's
it's
very,
literally the story of
sacrificial.
every Assyrian person who came here, same idea. But it's crazy how you mentioned that a lot of countries weren't willing to accept them, because I remember at a time, even Canada was so open to accepting Muslim refugees, and they were not willing to accept Christian refugees. And I was like,
Correct.
this, like, why?
Yeah,
Can you shed some light on that, or?
Well, I can tell you from the United States perspective, which was so hard. I mean, just tore us up. Because the Bush administration was responsible for creating this mess that we had. Under the Bush administration, they never would admit that the Christians were being persecuted as a result of their actions. So they didn't, if you can't admit that, or you can't acknowledge that, then you're not going to do anything about it. So they didn't make any special provisions for Christians, because it would be admitting that you made a mistake. So that started under the Republican administration, and that held through the subsequent Democratic administrations as well. They didn't want to. They would say things like, but for different reasons. They will say, like, well, Christians are respected in Islam, which, if you've actually been a Christian minority in the Middle East, your real life tells you completely otherwise, all the time. So it's so nice of us to tell people you're not persecuted when you've never lived their experience and you know nothing about it. So they didn't want to give any special dispensation. And in fact, we found in our experience that they were more open to Muslims and less open or closing the door on Christians.
But the reason for being more open to Muslims, like, wouldn't that be the same reason? Like, it wouldn't be the same reason, I should say, as not being open to Christians. So how is that different? Because can't they argue that these Muslims are experiencing this persecution because of us as well? Like, or was it seen they're experiencing their persecution for a different reason than why Christians are experiencing their persecution?
I think under the Obama administration, there were a few people in the administration which had Muslim Brotherhood leaning ideology, and were, they were trying to portray things differently than was actually happening in the Middle East. So a lot of decisions were made by people who didn't have, who see things differently, I should say.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you and Joseph ever have to go into, like, a room with your meeting a terrorist who maybe that you felt that they were stringing you along and not giving you the information you needed? Did you ever have to go there and it was like almost guns blazing to get them to really understand the magnitude of this? Or was it always just this chess game, with words and body language and understanding things?
They're there on their own accord. When they enter into a relationship with the CIA, it's their choice to be there. So it is a chess game, but I can tell you, so much of the time I could figure out that the information they were giving us was crap.
Okay.
This was not unusual. I would say that was probably the norm. And so what you're constantly doing is saying, this doesn't hold up. We checked it out, and you don't want to upset them because they could also harm you, right? So you would, there were sometimes you're just like, we cannot work with the source because he's lying to us. And so you have to let them go quietly, and we want to make sure they're happy. We don't want to, make someone angry at us. So yeah, it was, oh my gosh, you guys, it's so interesting because people think it's so hard to collect intelligence when it's exactly the opposite. It's really easy to recruit. It's really easy to get sources. It's really hard to get good information.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Michele, when it comes to like the day-to-day when you guys were there, right? When you were in Iraq and Baghdad, did you ever have like a time where, let's say you weren't meeting with anyone and let's say like bombs went off right? Because we oftentimes hear, oh, like my mom used to say, like there'd be times where like bombs would just go off and we'd be scared and fearing for our lives. Was that like, did that happen with you guys when you were there? Like maybe, I don't know, if you were in a car and you saw like a car bomb go off on the side of the road, like did that ever happen to you guys, or
So
were you guys away? Yeah.
a daily experience. So we had it easy, and I want to be really clear about this. I'm not going to we were in the green zone. So most of the time in that sense, we were much safer than the men and women who are in the military and were out in the streets where the death and destruction was everywhere all the time. So I don't want to equalize my experience with that, because that was far more dangerous.
Okay.
But within the green zone, it did get pretty dangerous because the Shia insurgents were being trained by Iran on how to get their rockets to go exactly where they wanted them to go. So before they figured that out, they were just like lobbing rockets and they would never land where they wanted. And then suddenly they were like ding, right straight exactly into the parts of the green zone where they wanted them to land. And so they would do this every afternoon. I don't know why the afternoon. But like between like 3 and 5 o'clock, it was like they drank tea, they shot rockets. Like seriously, I don't know.
That's hilarious. Oh
it was the same time, like it's rocket time, and then
I'm so sorry. That's just hilarious. Just the way you said it was just so priceless. Tea and then rocket time.
Yeah.
Continue. Sorry, go ahead. I don't want to
we
interrupt.
have to laugh. Like, yeah, we laugh at that all the time. Like, well, it's that time. So they would shoot between 6 and 9 rockets at a time because they had these mobile rocket launchers. And so they would move them around. They were mobile, which means they'd shoot. They would all land, but then we could never get those guys because they would shoot from neighborhoods, you know, and so, you know, every afternoon, you know,
that's scary though. Like, weren't you guys like ever worried like it's gonna land right on top of you guys?
You're like in the bunker and you're like this crouched down and you're just like, please God, and they're exploding and then you have stupid moments where you're like, when I see this in the movie, you don't know how you smell. You know, you start, I can smell the burning rockets and the rocket fuel. And you think to yourself, oh, I didn't know that the ground shakes when the rockets hit. So you're being like thrown all over the place. These are dumb things. You're like, oh, Hollywood can't really show how this feels in real life. And so we spent a lot of time in bunkers. We spent a lot of time running to bunkers and every day. And then every morning we would wake up to a car bomb.
Oh, shoot.
Often be right outside the green zone. And it's a horrible way to start your day when you think 30 people just died. Yeah. You know, 30 Iraqis on their way to work, trying to make an honest living, trying to feed their families. Boom, they're gone. And so that's really rough from both a spiritual, emotional, intellectual level for that. And then I'm not kidding when I said like every morning, 6, 7, 8 a.m., boom.
Damn. Like, how do you start your day? Like, when you know that just happened, like, walk us through like the mindset like you need to have. Like, what got you through those days? Was it because you had Joseph there? Like, was he integral in helping you get through that? And I imagine that was probably vice versa if that was the case for him.
Yes. It was so heavy. Gosh, it was so heavy and so hard. And so your whole countenance is very like, you start the day very low with the car bomb. And then, you know, you grab your breakfast, you go to your desk because I was so busy that I hardly ever ate a meal in the chow hall. I ate almost every meal at my desk working because we were overwhelmed. The one thing that gave us this surge of adrenaline or energy that we needed to get through such hard missions that we were doing every day. Mission meaning like, you know, getting this intel, gathering the intel and pushing it out, was the military would say, hey guys, great job. That car bomb was exactly where you said it was going to be. And we were able to, take it apart before another explosion, right? Or that IED, improvised explosive device, was exactly buried in the road where you said it was going to be.
Oh, wow.
We found the safe house that you reported on yesterday. And we found several Iraqis that were almost tortured to death, and we saved their lives when we went into that safe house. Like, I'm telling you, those moments were like, this is why we're here.
Right.
Makes the struggle worth it. This is how I get up every morning, Groundhog Day, still in a war zone, still in Iraq, still struggling. I mean, for every day for a year, that's how you felt. And then you'd have these, thank God for these would happen multiple times a day where you would say, that intel was good, it's worth it.
Wow. Oof. That makes it, that definitely, I can imagine, makes it worth it, because you can actually see the fruit of your work where you actually did, you know, in that example, save those people, right? Or get the good intel that saved those people, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Because most of the time in the CIA, you don't see the fruit of your work. Like, you don't know. You just kind of, you feel a little bit isolated. Did it check out? Was it good? But in a war zone, you have a lot more resources at your fingertips to figure out whether it was good. Thank God for that. Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, in war times, certain countries, the people, the citizens will rise up and fight against the other nation that is, you know, attacking them or whatever the case may be, what they're at war with. And so US, Iraq, was the sentiment from the Iraqi people, the everyday people, was it the sentiment what we were seeing on the news, which is like, oh, they're painting the picture of like all Americans are bad, they hate Americans, and they're willing to like fight, the everyday people, the civilians are also willing to fight the American soldiers. Was it like that, or was it just like a small portion or a population of the Iraqi people who were of that mindset?
Great question. I would say we made such a mess that I would say most Iraqis were not happy with us. And I would say probably most Iraqis were joining groups that were fighting us, you know, and they almost had to out of survival, right? So there was Sunnis fighting Shia for control over the country. And but then within each group, there's the Sunnis fighting Sunnis for resources and control. And there's Shia fighting Shia for resources and control. So it was like there was fighting everywhere all the time over everything, right? But the one thing that was really quite amazing to watch was like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, one of the groups. I mean, there were multiple insurgent groups and multiple terror groups. But of course, one of the most powerful was Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Well, at some point in time, the Sunnis were like, you people do not represent us. In fact, you're killing us. So we can't stand here and let you destroy us and our communities. We're going to fight back. And so once we realized that there were all these really good people who were trying to do the right thing against Al-Qaeda, we were able to then work with them against Al-Qaeda to, you know, push those people out of their villages, out of their towns, out of their communities. And so there were a lot of very brave Iraqis who said enough is enough and stood up to that.
That's fair.
But awesome. I would say we were not very, very popular for obvious reasons.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, no, it's like what happened in kind of like in Vietnam, where it's like you just didn't know the country, you didn't know the terrain, and the people were all united against the Americans. So I was just wondering how it was with the Iraqis. I think we both want to know, like, did you have any favorite Iraqi food?
Have a favorite Iraqi food?
Iraqi food, yeah.
Oh, Iraqi food is great. Oh my gosh. I just love all the kebabs.
Kebab is fire.
Kebab is pretty fire.
so good. Like the Iraqis and Iranians actually put so many herbs and flavors into their food that you don't find in other parts of the Middle East. And all of the baba ganoush and the dips.
Baba ganoush. I love baba ganoush.
I love baba ganoush.
I know, that's the best. Right?
100%.
Yeah, I had some rice in Iraq that I'm like, I am dying. Anybody in your community know how to make this rice? It was pink rice. I don't know if it was like pomegranate flavored rice. I'm looking for the recipe.
If anybody watching this knows the recipe, make sure to reach out to Michelle. She'd be very grateful.
Well, I'll ask my mom. Maybe my mom knows how to make it, but we've never had it pink. We've had it orange or we've had it yellow.
Hey,
So
I'll take even the orange. I know how to do the yellow,
yeah,
but even the orange, that sounds amazing.
yeah. That one with kebab, that's all you eat it with. The dry rice with kebab. It's meat and rice, and that's it. And if you want to add baba ganoush or something else, you can. But that's the traditional. We love that type of rice.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I just remembered a quick question I want to ask. So you obviously got a lot of training, like combat training, right?
No.
I'm assuming. No, you did not. No. Okay. I was wondering, because what would happen like if you were ever with like an informant and like let's say they wanted to get aggressive. I don't know. Has that ever happened where they like got aggressive, or no? You guys were able to always talk them out of it, or just kind of use your words.
In war zones, you had security. Like every quote, we called them moves. Every time you went to a place, a movement, you had massive security, and these sources were supposed to be searched before they even got into the place where you were meeting, because they could be wearing an explosives belt.
That's
which
true,
is exactly what happened in Afghanistan and Coast. The source came in with an explosives belt on because they didn't search him.
Oh, shoot. Meeting with you guys or
with my colleagues.
with your colleague? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you really needed to pat someone down, make sure they don't have a gun, a knife, a weapon, a suicide vest or something like that. So no, we weren't taught, like kinetic type military stuff. I mean, we got qualified on weaponry because we had to have that on us. But in the CIA, if you actually use your weapon, it's already too late. Like
I was going to say, that's probably the last resort, right? Like to pull out your gun or whatever.
Absolutely. Right? But I think the most valuable training we got was like how to use your car as a weapon if you need to, like how to use your car, how to drive well, how to drive, how to avoid obstacles, how to make quick decisions, how to push your car to the limit. Like that for me was probably the most useful. And I did have to use that training in real life.
Oh, tell us, please.
I was going to say,
expand.
And after, once you expand on that, do you ever feel like using that training on the road nowadays?
All the time.
She like cuts people off.
She just wants to rip it.
That's so bad to admit.
So it is true, right?
I mean, you probably see somebody who's not knowing what they're doing. You're like, screw this. Let me just pedal to the metal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I live in Florida, so there's a lot of people who drive in the left lane who are going very slowly, and that's a problem. So I actually had to use counter ambush training that we'd received, which is identifying when you're sitting on the X, meaning the place where the terrorists launch an attack against you is called the X, and so they're like, you have to get off the X if you're going to stay alive, if you have any chance of staying alive. And if you're in a car, that's the best place to be. And if your car is operable, your best chance is to drive off the X away from the site of the attack and the place where the terrorists have the greatest advantage against you. Terrorists or criminals, this is very useful in places like Colombia, with the cartels and criminal gangs and things like that. So, we were serving in a country that was one of the kidnapping and carjacking capitals of the world. And what was happening was tribesmen would find a target of opportunity, not necessarily searching for them and be like, oh, look, there's a white person. They could be worth a lot of money. And so they would kidnap Westerners, sell them to Al-Qaeda, and those people never came back. They would either end up in a video with their head getting cut off or were killed. So Joseph was like, you can never get taken. Like you die trying to get away, but never get taken. So I was like, check. Got it. Not going to be. It's between them and me. It's not going to be me. And that's so right. I was driving to work one time by myself because Joseph was out of the country. And it was in a place where they're not used to seeing women's faces. And, I'm driving a car, so I'm not going to cover myself while I'm driving a car so I can see, obviously. And
that makes sense. Yeah.
Call me crazy. I want to see where I'm going. But I was stopped at a stoplight, and a car pulled up behind me and a car beside me, and a guy was crossing the road in front of me, and he it looked up through the windshield and saw my face, and it was too much for him. So in the middle of broad daylight, in the middle of the road, in front of my car, please excuse this, but he whipped it out.
No way.
I know
this
this sounds so terrible, but this is literally what happened. And he started doing like a Harvey Weinstein kind of deal. And I have traveled all over the Middle East by this point, and I've traveled all over the world, and I was like, oh my God, this is not happening. This is so embarrassing. Oh my God, how? I can't believe he's doing this.
Were you literally like, are you serious? Come on.
I was like,
for real? Like, really? Like, it's just.
That's exactly what was coming out of my mouth. I was like, come on, man. Seriously?
Like, control yourself.
I was like, it's a
crazy.
face.
Oh my God. Like, literally, it's a face.
It's a face. And,
oh my God.
Like, so you go from like being so humiliated, embarrassed, like what is happening, what's going on. But then I had a switcheroo where I suddenly realized like, oh, men were starting to come out of like the woodwork, because they weren't fascinated by him, but they were like, what's eliciting this response? Like, what is in that car? And so they were coming to shops, and these are people who carry weapons. So these people with weapons are coming out. And this is a country that I'd been in already a year at this point. And when there was a car accident or something like that, they would literally, hundreds of men would surround the vehicle, and then the people couldn't get anywhere. Like, you were trapped. And I was like, oh, as the men are starting to come, I was like, oh, I'm about to be trapped. I've seen this before. And I was like, oh, I can't be trapped. Oh my gosh, I'm sitting on the X. Oh my gosh, I'm on the X. It was like this slow, gradual realization, like, I'm sitting on the X. And I'm a female, an American female by myself in this vehicle. Oh no. And so my training thankfully kicked in, and I hit him with my car.
Awesome. I was going to say, I wouldn't blame you if you did. And that's awesome. I'm
Yep.
glad you did. That's so bad to say in a way, but like, I'm glad you did.
I was waiting for that. Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not getting my head cut off. Like, it's very,
no.
I made that decision, not going to happen. And so, I hit him. He went flying, onto the ground, and he looked at me, and I'm like, he's shocked that I just did this. I'm shocked that I just did this. And
it's like, dude, are you really shocked that I just ran you over? Like, look what you were doing.
So, and then, he got back up and he continued.
Oh my God, there's no way. That's actually crazy.
Maybe the most stubborn guy in this whole country, and he's sitting in front of my car. And so I was like, okay. And I had to hit him a second time. So I hit him the second time and fell down. And I think he realized at this point, like, she's serious. And I was like, no, I will run you over the next time. Like, I don't want to, but if I have to, I will. Like, it's again. So he finally like moved out of the road, and I like
booted it. Wow.
That is one of the best stories I've ever heard. That's actually insane.
Where was this? Can you share where this was?
I can't say.
It's not declassified, Matthew.
Damn it.
But that's crazy though, Michelle. Like to have heard that, and like I can't even imagine what was going through your head. Like at that moment, like you're just, like you said, like the training kicked in, and you're like, yeah, no, like I can't be here right now.
Got to get out of the X. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And then adrenaline, because the fear is so profound. And I probably literally shook for like 2 hours afterwards. I just was like this, like all morning, because you also realize like how quickly things go south. If you don't act well quickly, then you're done, and you wish you had. And I just didn't want to be that person.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing.
So tell our audience what you're working on now, where they can connect with you, any social media or anything like that. And maybe some of your last thoughts for this crazy world that we're living in.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So I'm actually working on my second book now, which my first book, Breaking Cover, is a memoir, and has really these incredible stories that were all cleared by the CIA. But I think the best story is the Iraq evacuation operation at the end. And like it goes into full details, which is just an incredible, to watch really the hand of God move in such a miraculous way on behalf of these people was amazing. So now working on book number 2, that's helping people get unstuck. Yeah, because life is full of, needing to push yourself off that X and move forward. And it can be hard to move forward from fear, intimidation, uncertainty, all these things. So it's like using various skills to get yourself unstuck. So people can connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I have a website. It's my full 3-part name, Michele Rigby Assad. But if you probably type in Michele and CIA, you'll get all that stuff. So, and I love your listeners, really. It's such an honor to meet with you guys and to know your backgrounds. I'm so grateful for your parents' sacrifice that could give you an opportunity to build this amazing life in Canada. Thank God for their sacrifice. But I think what I'd love to leave your listeners with, life purpose is all about giving to others. It's all about doing good for other people. It's not about like self-actualization or pushing self forward. I think it's the opposite. I think it's about pushing others forward, about doing good for other people. I think that's what we're called to do. And I think when you do that, it takes a very dark and difficult world and turns it upside down, and you watch amazing things happen when you do that.
Oh, that was well said.
Yeah, well said. And we're going to be putting all those links in the description as well, so you guys can connect with Michele. But serving others, one way you can solve your let's just talk about finance for a second, your financial problems, is choosing how many people you can serve and in a certain capacity and becoming more valuable in that particular area or that field. And then you could serve others. So don't buy into all this, communism talk and socialism talk. It doesn't work. Like you just heard a former CIA counterintelligence, counterterrorism, personnel saying that like we were there to fight terrorism in a communist country. Like that's what it's all about. Like there's corruption, right? And so you don't want to have a system where everyone's equal in the sense of equal finances, equal opportunity, because not opportunity. We want equal opportunity, but you know what I'm saying? Equal finances, because then everyone becomes equally poor and miserable.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody's equally poor in poverty in socialism.
Yes. Yeah.
So we can be sure of.
So we all have equal opportunity, but now what you make of that opportunity is really solely on you. And I love that. Yeah. Service, sacrifice, but in the service of others, and you'll be fulfilled. Like you seem like you're very happy. Like that's,
I am. Yes.
Yeah. And we also talk about, like on the podcast, find something that you're good at, or find something that you love to do and then get good at it, and
I say that all the time.
Yeah. And honestly, like great minds think alike. It's one of those things where I feel like we're on such a same wavelength, same page. And it's the rule, right? Just be passionate about loving others, helping others, and everything else will come. You know what I mean? And for us, I'm super grateful to God for the life he's blessed us with. And being able to just have this interview to get to know you better was awesome. And we love the stories you shared. So thank you so much for all of that. It was awesome.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Michele. So guys, that was amazing. If you guys have watched this till the very end, we appreciate you. Like and subscribe, leave us a comment, and reach out to Michele, connect with her, check out her book. And until next time, Michele, thank you very much for coming on the show. And we're out, you guys.